Thanks for starting the recording, Michelle.
I pasted a link to the survey mapping best practices proposal that we left off on last time, in case we want to do that. But I don't have a strong opinion about what we should cover right now, based on the timeline of what you are doing when you need to be presenting this.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about, I mean, how many people are going to the Odyssey meeting in Rotterdam in April?
I will be there, and hopefully Nicole, but we'll see what happens with her travel plans.
Right. And do you remember, have we finalized like scheduling that collaborative meeting with the psychiatry working group?
I don't know, that was for global.
Oh, that was for the global symposium. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. Nicole and I have been talking offline. I think we also did plan something. Ugh. Yeah, I don't have the details, so right. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot in the air. I know that Alexander and Christian are going to swing by the SNOMED International meeting, which is in Vienna, just a couple days before the Odyssey meeting, to meet with folks from sort of the leadership from LOINC and SNOMED, so we can talk a little bit about the direction that they're going and how that's going to impact what we do, if it impacts it at all, in terms of like Odyssey vocabulary work. Yeah, I guess I'll just open it up to see if anybody has any specific agenda items they want to talk about, or things that we want to review.
Nothing really from my side. I was just popping in to see what was going on, so nothing I need to discuss.
Okay. Yeah. Michelle or Ben?
No, likewise. I've been really bad. I've been trying to get caught up because I've been so busy lately. I haven't been able to participate in the last couple of meetings. So
Yeah, I hear ya. Okay. Do we want to just end the meeting and give folks time back?
do we have a couple like high priority next step kind of things that we need between now and the next meeting, or is there something that?
No, we don't. I mean, the things that Nicole and I have been talking about, at least, have been sort of preparing for the meeting. And then honestly, I've been juggling just a whole bunch of other non-Odyssey related stuff. But one of the things we do have, and that I've kind of put a little bit on the back burner, I feel like I'm sort of the rate limiting step in this right now, is the paper that we're, kind of doing as a group. And I know that my next steps on that were to sort of, outline some specific tasks and allow people to sign up to do those or delegate those. But I've been working on some grant deliverables the last couple weeks, so I also have been very distracted from this work.
Okay.
And
Did
Ben,
you want to just
go ahead?
Did you want to just go through the document? Is there anything you want feedback on for it before the May submission? Our last meeting notes say that This will be targeted for submission to the Odyssey Steering Committee by May 2026.
Oh, and we're talking about the recommendations.
Yeah, the survey mapping best practices proposal.
Yeah. I mean, Michelle, do you happen to have that up so that you could share it, or do you want me to grab it?
I posted the link in chat if you want to grab it.
Oh, sure. Okay. Okay. There we go. And has everybody had a chance to go through the proposal? Am I sharing? I'm not, am I?
No.
No.
Okay, so hang on, here we go. Share my screen. And here it is. Are you guys seeing the doc? Oh, Alexander's in there. Okay. Alexander, are you on the call?
That might have been the
No.
chat from last time.
Okay. Okay. All right. So has everyone had a chance to take a look at this at least?
Well, we looked at it last time. I think we got down to, I don't know if anybody was able to look at it on their own time, but we were talking about.
Are we in this section? 3.
Yeah, I think we were in that section.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and I did take a look at it too. One thought, one of the things that occurred to me this morning as I was thinking about this is that, you know, I feel like a lot of what we do in terms of the data structures in OMOP is really dependent on what the terminologies do, right? Because there's this trade-off between capturing meaningful information in a code, right? So if you think about like a SNOMED concept for, let's just say SNOMED had a concept model that captured the fact that, the Beck depression inventory is a self-report instrument, that it's used to measure depression, that it's used in a certain age group. The terminology itself, you would be able to navigate and get the information, the clinical information you need through the relationships that are defined for the SNOMED concept itself in the vocabulary tables, right? So that's scenario A, where you capture a lot of meaning in your concept ID. The other option is, I think, a little bit what we've been talking about, which is probably going to be necessary for questions and answers, right? Not necessarily entire instruments, but this idea of the LOINC code that we have for this question and this answer does not provide the interpretation, right? So we have a LOINC code that says, has a doctor ever told you you have cancer? And then we have an answer code that is yes or no. The LOINC is not set up to represent the meaning of the answer. So we're talking about extending the measurement and observation table, right? So that we can capture that.
That's
My
a
point
really
is-
interesting Well, it's an interesting conundrum because again, Loinken measurements was absolutely defined to not infer any kind of clinical meaning or any kind of interpretation, right? That's for observations. That's not for measurements.
Yep.
And
But it
this is one
does
thing
for
we struggle with.
measurement, right?
What?
It does for measurement. It
Well,
does
but
for
it's not.
like its lab tests.
It's
Go
not
ahead.
technically supposed to. Like the measurements are supposed to just represent the measure and the result, right? That's the whole point of the link. It just gives you what it is and what the actual value is of that finding, whether it's an answer code or whether it's actually just a string or a numerical whatever it is. I mean, that's true for blood pressure. That's true for laboratory. That's true for proms. That's true for pros. That's true for questions. That's true for like essentially any measurement, vital signs,
Yep.
you name it.
Yep.
And so I'm just curious about where we were going with this idea of, the representation of the interpretation of that particular measurement, because that is a separate, like in the clinical terms, the clinical reasoning aspect of that interpretation of that measurement that leads to an observation, which is then acted upon or not.
Right. I see what you're saying. Even in the measurement space, we have, okay,
Right.
Your blood pressure is X. We don't then translate that to, right.
Right. And the link code defines the systolic measurement, and then you look for the, the name value pairing with the value being next to it, and that means that's a systolic blood pressure measurement, and the reference range is this, and the blah 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 is that. But there's no interpretation piece of that. I mean, apart from the fact that, well, this number's well outside the reference range, so it's probably not a systolic blood pressure measurement or something like that, or I mean, there's that piece.
Right.
But the clinical interpretation or the clinical reasoning or the reasoning interpretation piece that would lead to an observation is not part of the LOINC infrastructure, and I think that's intentional. Yeah. So we just want to make sure we're not trying to make it do something that's not really designed to do.
Okay, and so I think yes, and I would say the one difference, the one missing piece in clinical terminology when it comes to assessment instruments, and this is not the case with questionnaires, right? But this is definitely the case with things like psychometrically validated assessments that are designed. They're similar to lab tests, right? Where there's a cut point. If you score this on the PHQ-9, it means one thing, right?
So, right, positive finding for, right, yeah.
Yep, 100%. So I think, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important that we kind of distinguish between these psychometric instruments and surveys, right? Because psychometric instruments are more like lab tests, and questionnaires and surveys are not.
Yep.
Okay, so, and I don't know if I'm smart enough to think this through well enough, but let me at least just throw out thoughts. We seem to have, there's a division of labor, right? In data science, there's a division of labor between encoding and representing what it is that we're measuring, right? And then the analysis or interpretation of the meaning of that. So what we capture in our lab tests, we know, unlike something like the PHQ-9 or Edinburgh postpartum depression inventory, if we have a glucose test, we know exactly what we're measuring, the component we're measuring, glucose. We know we have enough information about that test to know how to apply logic to the metric that the test yields, right? Is this a blood glucose? Is this urine glucose? Is it, whatever? And what is the test method? We don't have that for psychometric instruments. We don't know, for example, that the Edinburgh postpartum depression instrument is measuring postpartum depression, and the Barrett impulsivity in inventory is measuring the personality trait of impulsivity. Okay, so there's some work that's not being done in the terminology, right? That needs to be done in the terminology for psychometric assessments. But then I guess the question is, more broadly with the assessments, where is our division of labor, are we essentially using OMOP to do analysis that maybe, data structures to do analysis that should be done in the software?
Mhm.
I mean, because let me give you an example. The binary stuff, yes or no?
Right.
Okay, I feel like, yeah, we can actually have a concrete, category, history of cancer, no history of cancer. But what about things like, I felt, I've had very little energy in the last 2 weeks, and the answer is a Likert scale from none of the time to all of the time. How do you even, are we assigning an interpretation to each value?
So we're using code for the logical relationships of like those interpretation components. We are not currently using code to your first point of defining the appropriate use of an instrument, which I think is actually kind of important, because in our example of the depression screening, whether it's postpartum or whether it's just generic population screening, the PHQ-9 is actually used for both screening and for monitoring, and not all, and that's not really clear anywhere in any of the definition components of the terminology. And I think that's really important, right? I mean, that's kind of, and I mean, the experts know that, and that's when we design the measures and we design the use cases and the improvement initiatives around those instruments, we know that, but that's insider knowledge, if you will. That's not really part of the representation. So yeah, I mean, I get it. I know what the solution is, but so yeah, I mean, if you see this in secondary data, trying to do some research against it, it's hard to know. I mean, you can know which instrument might be used because it's defined by the code, but they using that appropriately, right? Is that really going to be relevant? Is that high quality data for your research, because they may be using the wrong instrument for the wrong purpose because they don't know that particular piece of metadata or that particular piece of contextual information.
Yeah. Or even more importantly than the intended use is, what does it measure?
Right.
I mean, even the basic, are we measuring, is this a measure of glucose, or is this a measure of, hematocrit, or, but okay, I think I've let us off course here. Ben,
that gets across, but like,
take it away. Lead our discussion here.
Oh, Lord.
Come on.
Deep thoughts for a Tuesday morning. Do whatever time it is for you Tuesday. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like that. Like a LOINC code, for example, has the name of the test. It has the name of the measure, whatever you're trying to do. But if you don't know what the name, like, what if you don't explicitly know what that test is intended for, because you're not a laboratory specialist, you're not a clinician who's ordering a test, perhaps. It's hard for the researchers on the back end to figure out, like, well, was that the right test? Is this data that was collected from this test for this right context? And we try to do some of that in the logical relationships through our code in the measures themselves. But again, a lot of that information is sort of buried in the documentation piece for the justification, which no one ever reads, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, and I think the issue of, so there's been a lot of discussion among those of us working with SNOMED and LOINC about the need to extend the representation of what LOINC, so LOINC calls them survey, the class is survey, and they're actively working on that, because there's a recognition that we're not even representing the same components for assessment that we do for lab tests, right? We're missing arguably the most important piece of information, which is, what does this instrument measure? If it yields a metric that has been scientifically validated to reflect some underlying construct, what is that construct? But there's other pieces. I mean, I agree with you. LOINC doesn't say, if I have a glucose test, there's no way to use a terminology to take that test and the results and say, here is the interpretation of that. And that's not the
Right.
proper role of clinical terminology. And I
Right.
think the thing like I really struggle with, and Stan Huff at Loink talks a lot about this. I really struggle with this. What is appropriate and important to have as part of the clinical terminology, right?
Mhm.
What is important to have in our information model? And Stan talks about this a lot. It's like, well, that's information that doesn't belong in the concept. It belongs in your information model. So from the Odyssey perspective, our information model, right, is our observation table or a measurement
Right.
table.
Mhm.
But then I would say there's even this third piece, which is, okay, what goes in the what's important to have in the terminology? Or what's the labor that the terminology does? What's the labor that the information model is? And then thirdly, what's the labor that the analytics program does, right? Because when we're processing lab tests and doing research with that, we're not building that into OMOP. We're building that into our software, right? That's analyzing our data.
And I would argue that the information model for OMOP is actually not just the table, but also the themis and the data model definitions and perhaps the chapter of the Book of Odyssey that informs sort of what it's for and how it's supposed to be used. And, in the Fireside, we have implementation guides that do all that. But like in OMOP, we don't really have that same thing that's that well defined around a particular concept. Like we don't really have an information model for measurements. We just have a measurement table. It's kind of that's more the data model side, and it doesn't really have the extras unless it happens to have some convention or it happens to have some detailed, use case information or some additional artifact definition somewhere else. Which is how I think about information models. Yeah. And Stan's right. I mean, I love Stan. He's right, by the way, that, it's not the job of the clinical terminology to do that, but it's particularly difficult if you want to use this information for purposes other than clinical documentation. What's the authority? What's the gold standard reference for how to interpret that information?
Yeah. So I guess, okay, if we want to get really concrete, so do we have the proposal in this document that shows the representation of that triplet here? Guidance by instrument, oh, you know what? I thought there was even a better graphic in that PowerPoint presentation that Alexander put together. Michelle, do you happen to have that handy?
Let me look for it. There is a table up higher in
up
that
here?
document.
Okay.
Yeah, about the triples.
Oh, here we go. This one.
Yep. And then there are some examples and some decision frameworks.
So you know what? Let me see if I can think it's wait, or I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second because I was just looking at the PowerPoint this morning, but I have to dig it out of my email because I thought there's a couple good graphics in here. Where was it? Oh, here, Alexander's slides, right here. Okay. I'll share again. Here we go. Let's see. Here, this one. Okay, Ben, weigh in. I'm trying to remember I'm trying to remember if these slides are. Is Alexander on the call right now or no?
Yeah, he is.
Alexander, let's talk about, you lead this discussion. Let's talk about this. Is that too vague of
Oh,
a?
I was on mute, right? But I've been talking a lot.
Oh, yeah, you were on mute. Either
Okay.
that or I've been talking over you, which I've been known to do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was answering. So did I lead this? I mean, like I put these slides in place, and we don't actually have a good example for the first one. But yeah, we can go through, definitely. But this is actually not to show what like usually happens. This is what to show what is the outlier case, right? Because like usually we want the first one, which is 1-to-1. But yeah, but we have this, so let's go through this. This is in order to explain what happens with the, say, entity and the value, or where the entity could be the question, the variable, or something else, right? And the value, which is yellow here on the graph, could be the answer, could be the value, or whatever else you can imagine, right? So no matter how do we classify things. And the trick is when we do the mapping to the OMA common data model, sometimes you have to, well, there are different scenarios of mappings, right? So sometimes you map question to the event, right? And that is the first case here on the slide. And the answer is mapped to the value, right? So there is like straightforward 1-to-1 mapping between the entities. But in many cases, you actually have to do the combination, right? So you can't really map them separately, but you need to get the full meaning, which you only get when you merge the question and the value, or the concept and the value, which is the case number 2 here. And then you can only map this combination. And in the usual case, that would be mapped to the concept, right? So there is no value for this concept, there is a concept. But sometimes it's even more complex. And this is the third case here. Say you have the question and the answer in the source data. Well, both are separate. And then Piper, you're sharing, right?
I am. Are you seeing it
Yep.
or no?
Yeah, I am.
Absolutely.
Can you, because there's 3 different versions of the slide here.
Okay.
I just don't remember what the difference. Can you show me the 15 ones?
Yeah,
The
here's
next one?
15. And then this is
Next
16
one?
that we were just looking at. And then here.
Oh yeah, on the 16th one, I don't think this is a proper example.
Okay.
That is why there is a slide number 15, where I didn't
Okay.
actually find a good example for the third one. But
Okay.
it still exists, right? So we just need to run some SQL against vocabularies or against some of the ETLs in order to find them. So I don't have a good question for the third one. And as you can see, yeah, the rest of the examples are good ones, right? So the third one
So
was only
so
wait.
So you're saying in the third one, either the event, either the question or the answer could potentially represent the observation. And then so you're saying the value essentially would have 2 parts of the semantics. It would have information both about the event being recorded or what's being observed, and then the value of the observation.
Right, exactly right. So
okay,
this is a value, and you map it to a value, like in the usual, as in the usual sense. But the way the value is presented also gives you some hint or information on what the question is or what the lab test is, right? And this way you get some information from there, which means if you don't make a comma, then you would eventually lose this information, right? And that would affect the mapping, right, to the event itself. So yeah, totally right. But I don't have a good example at the moment.
I'm a little confused. I mean, so in row 2 there, we have sort of the name value pairing that leads to a singular concept. That seems to be represented again in row 3, except there's an additional pathway, so that it wouldn't be sequential. It's not like a pairing to get to the value stage. There's also an event repeated. What is that?
Well, it's not really repeated. In some cases, the events are like self-standing facts, and you don't really need a value, and this is the case 2. But in the case 3, there would be some, say, lab test being the event, and then you still need a value to represent the result. That is why these cases are different.
So
it depends on the target.
Precursor to the second case there, right? Where you have to have the test, you have to have the value that will eventually lead to an interpretable component to get down to the many to one.
Right, and it depends on the definition, or say the design of the target domain table and vocabulary. So sometimes you do need a value, sometimes you don't.
Right. Well, you would need I mean, it's where you would not need a value for an interpretation for that observation, or no?
You would not need the value to put the data in the OMOP in the proper way.
In the OMOP, okay.
It's not even interpretation, right? So that is just like the rules
process
to put the data in, right?
Okay.
And the first one is the swap, right? So you have the question and the answer, and when we map it, it's actually another way around, right? So the context from the answer. This one? Yeah, the last one.
4th one. Right. Okay.
Yep. So you have this daughter component, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is according to the current vocabulary, which is nomad. So family history is the observation, right? And the relative is represented in the question, not in the answer. But in the source, it was another way around. That is why there is a swap. But it's not actually a swap, right? Because some meaning is actually coming from the question to the question. So there should be one more line here. Because like, who in your family has had, this is actually the family history concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't really get it from the answer only. So there must be one more line here. So you can put the additional line right now. So there will be like a swap plus the straight transfer of information from question to concept. Yeah, but sometimes we could have a swap probably. I'm not sure, because that is really exceptional cases. But in some of the data sets, we have a lot of them, like UK Biobank or all of us. So in all these sort of things.
So maybe one of our challenges would be going through some question answer pairs and essentially seeing what the different sort of typologies, is that even the right word? Like different typologies of, or structures.
Well, I would say, yeah. When we map, we call this cardinality in some cases. When you look explicitly on the source, this is like the way of representing information. So basically the data model or cardinality as well. So this could be called this way.
So Alexander, can I throw out, here's something we've been struggling to represent. And I think this has very similar, the problem is similar to this question answer problem. So we're extracting from notes information about dietary supplements that people are taking. And we're extracting these triples. We're extracting the supplement, the sign or symptom that the person is using it for, and whether the supplement improves or worsens the symptom. So it's actually it's kind of a mix of what they're taking it for and then kind of adverse effects that they've experienced from the supplement. So
you know what? This is a little bit different because it's not explicitly connected, even though it's connected in the source and somebody actually, like the doctor, they represent the judgment in terms of whether it's connected or not. But the way we usually treat it in CDM is we just like split it into the separate facts. And first one goes to the drug exposure because that is the drug ingredient or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second is...
It's a device, I think, Alex, because it's a supplement.
Yeah, could be. We haven't yet really cleaned it up because like many of them are still on the drug, be it standard ingredients. According to conventions, well, nutrients should be devices probably, but well, not represented. And the second one, which is a condition, is like purely the condition occurrence record, right? So you map it this way. And the third one is not usually considered something that you would preserve in OMAP because that is usually the output of the study rather than the input of the study. And there is like the long debate about this. And well, at the end of the day, there is no good way to represent this in OMAP because this is sort of like judgmental or relative information that, yeah, there's no good place for this. You can put it into the observation table.
Yeah,
but
which is what we're trying to do, but we can't. You can say, you can put the supplement in the drug or device table. You can put the clinical finding, but you're not really interested so much in the clinical finding. You're really interested in the patient's perception of, it's almost like, why do you do cocaine, right? Why do you drink alcohol? I do it to relieve anxiety, or I do it to get energy, right? So it's less about the drug itself and more about the person's perception of the drug, the positive effects, negative effects.
Right, but then you represent it as the observation, right? And probably all three different facts are like separate facts that you like put into the appropriate tables, and you don't really need to connect them, right? This is separate to this stuff on this presentation because we have to connect everything, right? We have to connect questions and the answers and so on and so forth because this is the way how they were presented. What you're talking about is mostly separate events. And in the usual case, you don't really need the connections. You just like put them into separate tables and the statistics does the job because, well, you have them all on the same day and such sort of things. So there's no modeling problem when you need to connect all them, right? But in the survey, there is much more of this problem because we still need the connections and we need to track the mapping from the source to the target and have all these connections or proper coordination done in place so that you can get the full semantics. But in your case, probably this is just separate facts, even though in the study, you're going to find the connections. But you don't need the explicit connection in the database to run such type of study.
So that it would be more analogous to having a question that is, I take or well, let's just use an example of a substance that can be abused. So, let's see. I guess think about maybe medical use of marijuana, right? I use medical marijuana to what would be the question? To alleviate nausea. Well, or yeah, so you could have it anyway, right? True or false. You could enumerate the specific symptoms, or you could have a multiple choice question, right? It relieves nausea, or please select all the symptoms that you find marijuana helpful in alleviating.
Right. So this piece of information is exactly the survey type of modeling, right? But what I'm saying is that you don't necessarily connect this to the conditions or the drugs themselves, because probably there is not a lot of help, not a lot of point doing this. But exactly this piece of information, yeah. So, well, tell me how you're going to model this, right? And then we're going to map this. Probably we don't have any standard concepts at the moment to represent this properly.
Right.
So, yeah.
So in the last example here, in the fourth row, Alexander, is there a reason that you would have the thing you're observing be family history with explicit context of daughter and the answer asthma rather than family history of asthma? Well, I guess that and the syntax isn't right. And then have daughter as the answer. More similar to.
Right. So we would. But the thing is, when you look up the standard concepts, there's only, well, maybe except of this SNOMED stuff. So what you see here on the right is the SNOMED representation. And the way SNOMED models this is exactly this, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's no something else in LOINC or all of us or any other vocabularies that are currently standard. Well, the survey content in these vocabularies are standard. And then it means the alternative representation, alternative to what the SNOMED is. But I think that for this specific semantic area, say family history, we have a, well, not probably properly documented decision, but still there has been some forum discussion. And I think we said that this is going to be the standard representation for this, which means that whatever it's modeled in the source, you're going to map it to this representation, which is SNOMED observation concept. And the disease is the value, right? So the same way as the usual history of is modeled. You have the condition and the value, and then the history of concept itself.
Yeah.
So right, this is why we map it this way, because, well, SNOMED actually dictates you what the standard is going to be, unless we make some decision that we either do the in-house vocabulary, which could be totally different. For example, this is what we've done in the smoking status, for smoking status. So we came up with entirely new homemade vocabulary for the smoking, because even SNOMED didn't provide you the good representation. And I'm not saying this one is good. This is just like the current standard. And there is actually a long forum debate on this and the proposal from Masha on what we're going to do in the future with the family history, because it's not ideally modeled at the moment. But then nobody actually answered, right? So she just like put the proposal and the forum post, then discussion just stopped. probably sometimes we have to continue the conversation.
Yeah. No, this definitely makes sense for family history of disease to pre-coordinate the family member, right? And then post-coordinate the disease, just from the perspective of you're having to
Right.
there's 3 pieces of information here, and you have to pre-coordinate 2, at least with this model. You're pre-coordinating family history and the statement that it's a disease, right? And then you're specifying the disease.
Right, but there are some more attributes. If you look up this forum post, there are some more, right? So it's not just these 3. And in some concepts they're presented, and some others they're not presented. So the entire debate is a little bit deeper. But yeah, you're totally right.
So the difference between like family history of, past history of, risk for.
Maybe.
Okay. All right. I'll look at the forum post. Has there been any discussion about potentially having 3 fields to specify, if it feels like. Go ahead.
I don't think so, because in some of the tables we use, and we still have these additional fields like modifier and the procedure, then qualifier and the observation.
Yeah.
And I think that the general notion is that we're gonna either strictly standardize this, because there's no like a good standard for any of them, right? So there are some like ideas of what could be standardized and put into these fields, but there's no good vocabulary, there's no good convention, so on and so forth. And I think the whole notion was that we either remove these fields in the future releases of CDM, or we do a very good, like very well described and standardized vocabulary for that. And I don't think we have a decision or solution for any of those. So in general, we don't like many of these additional fields, right? There must be a very, very good use case to have them. And even those that we have at the moment are probably going to be removed in the future. And there is like a good reason for that, because whenever query that you run, you always need to look up these additional fields.
Right.
Well, or at least like in many cases, right? That is why we usually prefer
analytics.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
So we usually prefer to model this within the vocabulary, so we don't need to do this additional fields gymnastics.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which might not be achievable in the survey world, right? Because there are so many different attributes, and then you have a version, and then you have all the different things. Sometimes you even have triplets. So what next? What are you gonna do? So yeah, not easy.
It's amazing you said that. I was just thinking the same thing. I mean, so, how does this apply to survey?
Yeah.
Exactly right. That is why I'm personally more and more pushing into the new domain and the new table, which would allow like much more things than the observation table.
So you're thinking of a survey specific table.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like we're trying to retrofit a solution for survey into existing structures that they weren't designed for.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking about, if we were building this de novo, what would be the optimal architecture? Right.
So while I definitely support a separate table, probably because, again, I don't like forcing square pegs into round holes. I personally have not been successful in the past with changes at that level to the common data model in general, because the tooling is so tied into the current structure, and we would need to not only identify the new table, but also how we would build it essentially. So I just wanted to put that out there because it sounds like we really need our own table for surveys in particular, or certain. I mean, I don't know how we split the psychometrically validated instruments versus the surveys, but we also need to think about the fact of whether it would actually be adopted by the community because of the lack of or the breaking change it would cause in the tooling. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to understand how the community is currently using or analyzing survey or psychometric data, that's encoded using LINC, if they are at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of submissions last year to the Global Symposium for the scientific review that came through. People were using proms at least for their research, but I don't, there was not obviously enough detail because it wasn't a paper; it was just a, an abstract about the underlying terminologies they were looking at or how they were using them. I mean, it would be something we could put out maybe on a call, one of the community calls for this is a question we have for the community and that we would like people to help support what they're doing, what they're seeing, and maybe help us move towards a new table.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, understanding what people are currently doing, what they need, right?
Or what they're not doing because they don't have the thing to do it with, right? Like that's where's the big opening,
even a better
big gap.
question. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So Ben, are you going to be at the meeting in Rotterdam?
Sadly, no.
Okay.
I'm US based only, and so my personal finances don't allow for European travel at the moment.
Yeah. And if they did, would an OMOT meeting be what you wanted to spend them on?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a trip to Europe is always good for me. Regardless of what I'm doing, I can always pair other things to it. But yeah, no, it's
Hawaii this time of year. Oh. All right. Okay. Well, we're kind of at the end. Alexander, thank you so much for walking us through this. I actually feel I feel like I understand the problem a little better, but I also feel like it feels overwhelming, It feels overwhelming.
Sorry about that.
No, not your fault. It's the nature of the beast, right? So.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. I guess I'll see everyone on our next call and we'll have Nicole back. So we'll be much more organized and get things done. Although I don't know, I found this really helpful to talk this through, Alexander. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
See you next
Thank
time.
you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.